Welcome back to A Wild Approach, where we talk all things wildlife and native plant gardening. But today is my Halloween special, and I hope you will join me in talking about some spookier things and some not as spooky things, some garden discoveries, artifacts dug up from the soil, and those nasty, terrifying invasive plants that poison our gardens with their presence. Let's get into it. Let's talk about things that I dug up from the soil of my garden. What's this? A torture device? Animal trap? Ancient artifact from long ago? With some help from an artifact hunter from Reddit, we discover that it's a piece of mule neck yoke from a harness. Time period is estimated as late 1800s or early 1900s. This was likely used for farming. Maybe the mule was attached to a plow. I looked into the houses around me and their dates of building. One house stood out among the rest as being built in the late 1800s, and likely the original farmhouse in the area. What's this tiny, curious glass bottle I dug up from the very back of my property? It was found not very deep near my back fence and under the shade of a huge silver maple tree. It says Q-Tex on the bottom of the bottle. Took me some extensive research, but I found out that lots of these specific designs of Q-Tex bottles were from the 30s or thereabout. The house behind mine was built in the 30s. Maybe my property used to belong to that house at some point. Or maybe they threw the bottle over the property line back in the 30s, just discarding it. Not really sure, but it was a cool find. I cleaned it up and cut a cork specifically to fit to it. Now let's look at some of those 30s ads for this Q-Tex nail polish. They had a nail polish, but they also had a cuticle remover, and the cuticle remover was actually what got them started. And so I find it very interesting that this bottle is pretty much intact other than its label and its lid. So making a little cork for it, I just found it was the perfect thing to close it up. Next up is this tiny action figure arm. What could this be? Well, come to find out, it's actually an action figure toy likely from the 80s. I did a search and it didn't take me too long to figure this one out, surprisingly enough. This was apparently most likely a Croc Master action figure who was a villain in the G.I. Joe world back in the 80s. He seems to have come out the year I was born. There have been other things dug up, but I don't have photos of them all. I've also found bones that I presume belong to raccoons and such, based on internet sleuthing. But the truth is, I never suspected that I would continue to find artifact after artifact as I dug holes to plant my garden plants. It's so interesting what you could find in the history of your garden just by deciding to dig a hole for a shrub or a tree. And I find that it is super fascinating just to discover the history of your neighborhood if you can. I was trying to figure out the history of my neighborhood quite some time ago, and I couldn't really find a lot on it. And so now with this new discovery of this mule harness, I just was enthralled. And so as I continue to plant, and add more native plants to this garden and create more wildlife habitat, I hope to find more artifacts. in the future. Who knows what we will discover next time? In fact, I plan to add a pond to this garden as soon as I can. And when we dig for that pond, who knows what we will find? Do you need a short, quick guide to get started in wildlife gardening? Well, turns out I've got just the thing. I just came out with a new free ebook just for you, and it's called A Wild Approach to Gardening 101. And it's available on my website today at macylou.com/shop. It's free, so go check it out. What do you have to lose? Hey guys, can you do me a quick favor, pretty please? Could you hit the like button and the subscribe button under this video? It really helps me know which videos resonate with you guys. Now let's get back to the show. Next, let's talk about those insidious invasive plants. The ones that poison our gardens just by their presence. The ones that pop up out of nowhere, seemingly, and don't want to go away. The ones that come in uninvited. The plants that steal our joy and slowly choke and murder everything in their path. So first up, we're going to talk about Chinese privet. Chinese privet. What do I want to say about Chinese privet? Well, it's one of those plants that you think is harmless when you know nothing about gardening. But as soon as you learn any lick of information and you find out that it's invasive, and you have spent years letting it do its thing because you had no clue it was invasive, you quickly find that what you thought was a shrub when you first moved into your home ended up being a dark, huge, looming tree full of dastardly branches, tenacious sprouts, and really the type of supposed shrub but actual tree that will take over your garden in a matter of months and just a few short years. So I'm going to show you some images of Chinese privet. I'm going to tell you what happens with this plant. This plant was used as hedging. It was used to create a privacy screen, a screening hedge. It was meant to be kind of an evergreen hedge that you would trim back. But if you know absolutely zero about gardening and you just let things grow like I used to do, it doesn't really stay a hedge. It doesn't stay a shrub. It becomes a mini forest of tenacious weeds that shade out your native flora. So you will want to get rid of this plant at all costs. This is one of those plants that I use herbicide on. And I've talked many times about how I try my hardest not to use herbicide in the garden. But sometimes poisons are just what the doctor ordered. And in this case, herbicide is the poison that the doctor ordered. But I don't just spray it willy-nilly and go about my life. I have a method to the madness. What I do is I cut it down, and sometimes I have to cut it down and just walk away and it will resprout. And that was just to get a breather because it was such a beast to cut down. But really, what you want to do if you can is you want to immediately herbicide it after you chop it. Immediately. I mean within seconds. Because if you don't, this insidious, destructive shrub slash tree, let's be honest, will take over. It will create berries, and those berries have seeds, and those seeds will germinate rather insidiously everywhere, all over your property, even places you don't expect to see it. it will pop up. And so what do I do instead of spraying? I use a cheap dollar store foam brush and I dip it into the herbicide. Once I read the instructions, I make sure that I follow the instructions. Do the instructions tell me to dilute it? Do they tell me not to dilute it? I follow whatever the label says. And I take whatever mixture or not mixture and I put the foam brush inside and then I dab it on to the freshly cut stump. And it will kill it. Sometimes you have to come back with a second serving of the poison and use your foam brush to gently brush the green sprouts that will come up from the stump. But over time, you will kill it. You just need to be persistent. You may need to do this twice, you may need to do this 3 times. But the point of the matter is, it is extremely effective. And what's not effective is simply cutting it down. That is not effective. It's okay, of course, if you want to do this as a temporary solution until you can get your hands on some herbicide, because let's face it, cutting it back is better than letting it run rampant and letting it produce berries. So if you can cut it all the way back, it's better than nothing. But just keep in mind, it is a monster. It's a beast. It will come up from the grave if you do not herbicide it. It will. Especially if we're talking a big one like mine was. And I don't just mean sprouts a little bit. I mean, if you don't herbicide it, it's going to send up huge sprouts and it will become at least half the size of what it was before pretty quickly. So anyway, sometimes a little bit of poison is exactly what we need. Next up is English ivy. English ivy. What do I have to say about this plant? This is an insidious, invasive vine for our area. Remember, I'm in East Tennessee. If you're in England or Ireland, I forget exactly the exact regions it is native, but it's English ivy, so I think it's safe to say England or Ireland or both. Over there, it is vital, beautiful habitat for birds. But over here, it's a destruction machine. It likes to climb its way up our native trees and smother them slowly over time, slowly chipping away at their lives, gradually killing them. Kind of like cigarette smoking. But I don't have as much English ivy in my garden as I have privet, so I haven't herbicided it yet, but you may have to in your case, depending on how big of an infiltration you have. So far, I've been able to simply pull up the English ivies from the root where they come up. But it is a pain in the butt and they do come back often. Our next invasive plant is Bermuda grass. I know. It is one of my #1 enemies. And there are many ways to kill it. But unfortunately, it's tenacious and it is something that used to take up the entire garden. So it's going to be hard to get rid of completely. I've yet to completely get rid of it. I still have quite a bit of it. And it likes to twine its way up through the prairie plants, the shrubs. But when you plant enough and you plant densely enough and you plant enough aggressive native plants, it can knock it back quite a bit. Now, it's not going to completely get rid of it, and you need to know how this plant works. This plant is a grass, but it acts more like a vine. It spreads underground and above ground. It is pretty awful and pretty terrible. But there's one thing about it. Even though it's not native and it is invasive, it can be an alternative host plant for some of our skipper butterflies because it's a grass, and our skippers use grasses often as host plants. But that's the only thing it has going for it. Everything else stinks about it. It's not very good at erosion control. It's not attractive. It's really annoying to pull up. The people who say they love pulling up Bermuda grass and that it gives them a high are people I just can't relate to. What's your soil like? Because when I pull it up, it just breaks most of the time. And even when I think I'm getting the root of the plant, oftentimes I'm getting some of the root, but then it's breaking another part. And every little tiny piece of root of Bermuda grass can sprout some more of that nasty plant. So there are lots of ways to kill it. I'm gonna let you decide how you want to do it. I have tried herbicide and it did kill it for a couple years max, but it just came right back. Because here's the problem with any invasive turf grass that's not native to your area. It was covering likely your entire front lawn. I mean, if you had just a bare bones, just from scratch garden and you had no other plants and it was just lawn, I mean, if it was covering 90% of your property, it's going to be hard to get rid of. It's going to creep back in from areas where it still exists. This grass creeps under and over my concrete paths, my driveway, the edges of the paths. It pretty much just does what it can to infiltrate every area it possibly can. So, if you do use herbicide, you will most likely have to do multiple applications, and it's going to be a pain in the butt, and it might still come back. So one thing that I've found with Bermuda grass is that it helps if I remove as much of the Bermuda grass as possible and immediately replace it with aggressive native plants if I can. But there is another method that I like to use, and that is smothering. I really like to smother Bermuda grass to kill it. And I think that this is a great method depending on what materials you have on hand to smother it. Now, you can temporarily smother Bermuda grass with your autumn leaves. You can use autumn leaves that have fallen down to the ground, and you can move them over areas where you want to kill Bermuda grass. Now, please note, since these leaves break down rather quickly over the course of a few months typically, the Bermuda grass will mostly just kind of be knocked back a little bit. It won't necessarily kill it forever, and it usually won't, so it will probably come back, at least in certain areas and certain patches. And so maybe you take that opportunity to herbicide what comes up from the grave, so to speak, and you kill what's left. But a method that I've been using recently is I had some extra shingles, roofing shingles in my garage. And so I've been using them to smother the grass in new areas where I want to create a brand new garden. So I also want to talk about some plants that I'm really loving this time of year. There are certain plants that will give you this enclosed, kind of dark, kind of spooky, kind of abandoned feel. And I'm talking about thicket species and shrubs. And, you know, not everyone likes the abandoned feel, but I kind of do. And I don't mean abandoned as in you've got a bunch of invasive things just showing up and just entangled and creating a mess. No. I'm talking about the feeling that a place has gone wild and it has been put up to its own devices. I'm talking about overgrown hedges. I'm talking about evergreens where the birds can shelter in the winter and these little dark cubby holes that you can create in your garden with shrubs and trees. I'm talking about hedges. I'm talking about habitat for the wildlife. So naturally, I really love eastern red cedar. I said it. I love eastern red cedar. But eastern red cedar can get extremely tall. It can turn into a beast over time. So I plan to keep mine trimmed, and we will see how it goes. I know. I can't give you advice for this because I'm just starting this method, but I am hoping to keep one of my eastern red cedars just a little bit taller than me. I'm hoping that I can trim it with shears or those big scissors. I don't actually know what those are called, but garden shears, shrub trimmers, whatever. I'm hoping I can keep it just a little bit taller than me, because I don't want it to get so big that it just shades everything else around it. And that's because I am growing it in a hedge full of other plants like American plum, American elderberry, all planted really close together, all to create a thicket. And I do understand that some things may not survive over time and that some things may die. Death is a part of a garden's history. Life and death. Death can actually create fertility in the soil. The leaves that come off the trees, you just leave them where they are and they can create nutrients in your soil. They can make your soil texture better. So death actually helps create life in a garden. And so it's important to remember that not every single plant that you put in the ground is going to survive, and that's okay. And no, that doesn't mean you're a bad gardener. It just means that some things make it and some things don't, unfortunately. But in the meantime, make the best with what you can. And so I say, maybe focus on how can you create the garden of your dreams. And if you are into more thicket and shrubby species like I am, then listen up, because here are going to be some beautiful plants that I suggest for your garden, if they're native to where you are and if they make sense for your soil and your sun. So first up, I have American plum. American plum is wonderful in that it is a keystone species because it is in the Prunus genus, and so it hosts a lot of butterflies and moths right underneath the oak genus. So what is so great about American plum? Well, in my opinion, it's great because it is a thicket species. It does sucker to form a hedge or a thicket, and it has thorns. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, why do I want something with thorns? I mean, this is a Halloween special after all. And maybe you are trying to keep out the darker forces from your garden. Maybe you're trying to keep out the menaces. Maybe you are just trying to keep out predators that will kill your wildlife. There are many reasons you may want thorny plants. And although they're kind of more like branches on a plum tree, or on an American plum, I should say, they're very sharp and they're very pointy and they are huge and they're larger than your typical thorn that you would find on a blackberry bush. So I find them to be great at creating the very gothic, dark fantasy garden that you're looking for. And so another thing about American plum is it produces edible fruit. So you can eat the fruit or you can let it rot over time. And then the yellow jackets can show up and devour it. And that's also pretty based. But anyway, so another thing that I love about American plum is that the fall color is so wide-ranging, you guys. If you want to know exactly what color your American plum is going to be, you really need to go to the nursery when it is autumn, when it is actually changing colors, because otherwise you're not going to know what color it's going to be. I mean, unless the nursery people somehow write that down and they make note of it and they tell you, but I don't know, I think it's best to just go there in the autumn just to see what color it changes to, because here's the thing. I have some American plums that change more to a golden yellow. I have some that change to a beautiful peachy pink. And then I have some that turn to blood red in color. And so I think that it has potential to be almost any autumn color that you can imagine. Even oranges are in there as well. And so if you need to know exactly what color it's going to be, check it out in the autumn. But if you don't really care and you just kind of want to just roll the dice and see what it becomes, that's fun too. I have planted, I think, 7 American plums in my garden. And so I have some experience with where they really, really love to grow the best. They grow the best in full sun. Yes, they can handle a little bit of shade, like just a tiny bit of shade, but I would not put it in a garden that gets less than 3 hours of sun. It may grow, it may be okay, but it's just not going to grow as quickly for you. And if you want your thicket, if you want the brambles and the thornies, and if you want a hedge to keep out all those little menaces, well, you're probably going to want it to be planted in full sun so that it'll grow faster for you. And remember, it creates suckers. So it spreads itself, and it likes to create a long line of itself. So you will have plenty to share with your friends. And you can get them in on the thorny hedge idea and see what they think. So I've talked about Eastern red cedar, I've talked about American plum, and next I want to talk about viburnums. So there are actually a host of different viburnums, but for the purposes of this video, I'm only going to touch on one species of viburnum because it's the only one I have so far in my garden, and it is arrowwood viburnum, Viburnum dentatum. So Viburnum dentatum, or arrowwood viburnum, it has gorgeous fall color. And mine has more of a peachy pink with little hints of gold in it. And it kind of gets a rust color kind of mixed in. So it brings a lot of different colors together into a very beautiful color. And so I find that it is one of my favorite shrubs. It really is. And another really cool thing about arrowwood viburnum is the leaves. The leaves, especially this time of year when that color comes in, they're really striking because they have kind of sharp, pointy edges on them. Each leaf has these teeth, I guess you would call it, that are sharp, almost like a saw blade, and it is absolutely exquisite. Highly recommend for the garden. Plus, it's one of those plants that's great habitat for birds to nest in, and it also has beautiful spring flowers. And it also creates deep blue berries on it. Not blueberries. I don't think it's edible for humans. So you do your own research on that. Not literal blueberries, but berries that are blue. And the birds absolutely love them. Next up is American elderberry. Now, American elderberry, it's not really going to give you lushness this time of year. In autumn, in my garden at least, it looks more like a barren wasteland with warty branches and kind of a creepy form. And it gives you kind of a forlorn feeling, but in a good way. And the reason I love this plant so much is actually because it looks beautiful in the spring and early summer. In the spring, I guess around May in my area, it gets these huge flowers that are about this big around, bigger than my head. And they're gorgeous, and they're kind of an off-white, and they look like lace. And they're actually just absolutely beautiful. They kind of remind me of doilies, you know, from back in the day. Anybody remember what a doily is? Anyway, they're huge. They're probably one of my favorite native shrubs. And then later in the season, in the summer, they get the, like late summer, it gets these dark purple, almost black berries. And it is called American black elderberry, so that makes sense. But the berries are gorgeous and exquisite. But to be honest with you, this time of year, it looks a little bit creepier. It loses a lot of its leaves by now, at least in my garden. Maybe in a wetter garden, it might keep its leaves a little bit longer, but I have more of a dry garden, and so it loses its leaves pretty early. And so by this time, it looks like a charming, creepy, little warty conundrum of a shrub. And I love it. Not really little though, it's pretty big. It's actually pretty large shrub. And then, of course, I can't leave out arborvitaes. I know. A lot of you probably just think arborvitaes are stupid. I get it. A lot of people don't like arborvitaes. They think they're boring. But I personally love them this time of year because I love them paired with our colorful, autumn color deciduous shrubs. So you get that evergreen, just vibrant green, dark green, habitat for wildlife. Little birds can nest in there, and the arborvitaes and the eastern red cedars. And then next to them, you can have these vibrant orange or blood red shrubs. And it's just the color play, it's exquisite. It's just my favorite thing. And so you can't really go wrong if you mix all of these together, and it creates a beautiful habitat hedge, a thicket, and just something to adore. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed my little Halloween special. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Leave me a comment down below. Tell me what you think, and tell me what your favorite creepy little Halloween-esque inspired garden plants are, and your garden tasks and chores that you're doing around this time. This is a great time to trim things back and create brush piles. And brush piles are super important for our wildlife. So think about doing that if you have the time. Don't forget to leave the leaves, and don't forget to leave a comment down below. I mean it, please leave a comment. Even if it's creepy, even if it's dark, even if it's monstrous, I want you to leave it down below. Thank you all so much for being here. I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys. Happy Halloween. Brand new items are now available in the shop. Thanks so much to viewers like you for supporting the channel. To support the channel, like the video, comment, and subscribe. You can also support my work by buying art from me at macylu.com. Thanks for watching! Was I in focus? Focus, was I in focus? No, maybe so, I don't know. Oh no! Our dress is on fire! What are we gonna do? Oh no! I don't fit into the screen very well. Oh no, my wings are up. I can't have my wings up. People can't know I have wings on my glasses. It's just too much. Oh, this is what sunlight looks like. Who knew?